Chapter 6. Bystanders had gathered around the Hardys and the sailor. "All right, talk," Frank ordered, dragging the man to his feet. The heavy-set, dark-skinned sailor straightened up. Glaring at the Hardys, he asked, "What do you want to know about my ring?" "Where did you get it?" Joe asked. "Well, I didn't steal it, if that's what you think," the man said sullenly. "I bought it from another sailor just last night." What did the man look like?" Frank pressed. The sailor suddenly reddened. "Why, I don't know. He was from India. Say, I can prove anything I tell you." Turning, he yelled to the counterman to verify his story. To the Hardy's chagrin, the counterman did so, saying he had seen the transaction. "Well, we sure are sorry," Frank apologized. "We made a mistake. We'd like to make it up to you." The sailor grinned. "Well, all right. You could pay for my lunch check," he said. "I'm broke." "Maybe we can do even better," said Joe. "Want to sell us your ring?" he asked, recalling that Mr. Daly had said to spare no expense. The sailor hesitated, then took off the ring, named the price he had paid for it, and said he would sell it for a small profit. Frank paid him, as well as for the lunch check, from the $200 his mother had given him for the bank. The sailor saluted crisply and hurried away, shaking their hands ruefully. The Hardys returned to the less hasty in jumping to conclusions. They went to the bank to deposit Mrs. Hardy's remaining bills, then continued on towards the dock, where the Daisy K was tied up. She was not in port. "As long as we're here," said Joe, "we may as well make some inquiries about the crew." They quizzed supply men and ship captains. Finally, one of the captains declared, "That sounds like a fellow named Ragu, first mate on the Daisy K. Heavy-set, piercing black eyes. Comes from India. I've seen a ruby ring on him." Frank and Joe couldn't hardly believe their good fortune. The sailor they had seen leaning on the boat rail must have been the original owner of the ring. The captain said he had just seen him in the Seafoam restaurant. The boys hurried there and spotted Ragu at the table in a far corner. As the Hardys approached, Ragu glanced up slowly, half rose from his chair, then slowly settled back. "You're Ragu, aren't you?" Joe asked. "If it's important to you." "We'd like to know something about the ring you've been wearing," Frank told him. "I own no ring," the sailor said. Frank displayed the ring he had just bought. "You don't own this ring now," he said. "But you did. Where did you get it?" Ragu snatched the ring and hurried away. "You are evil boys," he almost screamed. Instantly, Frank and Joe turned to recover the ring. Frank picked it up. When the boys whirled back, Ragu was dashing on the other side of the door. The Hardys stared after him, but suddenly Frank stopped and said, "Joe, let him go. I'm sure that Ragu, the fellow who grabbed the falcon from you, if he doesn't think we're after him, and if he connects with the sender of those rubies, maybe he'll lead us to them." "Guess you're right, Frank." They went back to their convertible. As Frank was about to pull away from the curb, a voice said, "What a beautiful ring you're wearing, Frank." Frank and Joe looked up to see the smiling face of Callie Shaw, a close friend of Isla. Blonde, quick-witted, and carefree, she appeared particularly to Frank. Although interested and frequently very helpful in the boys' sleuthing, the pretty brown-eyed girl loved to tease the Hardys. "Is the ring a gift?" Callie asked. "No," Frank replied with a smile. "It's a clue in a new case we're taking on." Isla Morton had joined the group now and was talking to Joe. She said cheerfully, "Don't forget the fish fry at the farm this afternoon." "We wouldn't miss it for all the mysteries in Bayport," Joe replied. "The whole gang will be there," said Isla. "Why not bring along your hawk and give us a demonstration?" "Sure thing," Frank agreed. "Be there about 3, Callie said. "Games first, we'll eat at 5. The girls waved goodbye and headed for the waterfront fish shop. "Well, we'd better go exhibit Miss Peregrine," said Joe. "We'd better go home and groom her." When they reached the house, the boys showed their mother the ring and told her how they had paid for it. Mr. Daly will reimburse us, Frank explained. I'll put the ring in Dad's safe. After lunch, he and Joe fixed a bath for the falcon. Then they changed their clothes, picked up the bird's perch, bells, and lure, and set off for the Morton's farm. They found a lively gathering of a dozen couples playing a spirited game of softball. But the moment the young people saw the falcon, they focused all their attention on the birds. Joe set the perch on the ground and said they would let her fly later. The hawk remained quiet as Frank and Joe joined the game. Finally, Chet, who was wearing a flashy dark green shirt spotted with brown and white, said, "Show them what Miss Peregrine can do, fellas." Frank looked around for a quarry. Suddenly, a jay flying across the field at the edge of the woods. Frank picked up the bird, yanked off the hood, and flung the hawk in its direction. As the guests excitedly watched, the bird flew up to the jay. A short-winged goosehawk came rifling in the wind and dived towards the jay. "That's a training bird," Frank explained. Instantly, the two hawks began to fight over the jay. Joe started forward, calling excitedly to the falcon. Frank held him back. "Say, it's too late now. They're fighting to the death." But the falcon deliberately shifted to avoid the vigorous talons of the goosehawk, and then climbed up where she would have the advantage. While the hawks were maneuvering, the jay disappeared into a bush. Frank and Joe whistled and shouted for Miss Peregrine, hoping to stop the fight. Suddenly, the goosehawk took flight and disappeared into the shelter of the woods. The falcon oriented herself, located the boys by the sound of their voices, and came down obediently to the feathered lure. "Hey, you're pretty good," Chet exclaimed, admiring, and the other young people applauded. Hardy smiled, relieved that the falcon was safe, and looked up inquisitively towards the woods from which the goosehawk had vanished. "Come on, Joe," Frank urged. "Let's find the owner of that hawk. It could be Tarva." Frank hooded Mrs. Peregrine and placed her on her perch. Then the three boys hurried into the woods. Joe spotted a trail of recently trampled grass. Eagerly, the trio followed it. They had gone only about 100 yards when they were confronted by a large red sign with white lettering. "Dangerous area. Keep out." The boys were puzzled, especially Chet, who had never seen it before. "What's going on in here?" he said. The land looked undisturbed. There was no sign of digging, tree falling, or other hazardous operations. Farther ahead, the boys came across a similar warning sign. Frank turned to Chet. "What could make this such a dangerous area?" he asked. "I don't know," his puzzled friend replied. "Old Mrs. Smith owns these woods. She used to encourage the public to picnic here. If any big project were underway, everyone in Bayport would have heard about it," Frank remarked. "Let's split up and see if we can figure out what's going on," Joe suggested. He and Chet searched a wide sweep on either side of the trail, while Frank followed the trampled path. The boys lost sight of each other as the foliage became more dense, but Frank could check the others' positions from the sound of their path through the undergrowth. Soon these sounds were muffled, and the woods became a silent twilight world. Suddenly, from Chet's direction came a cry of help. "Chet's in trouble," Joe yelled. Instantly, he and Joe were crashing through the undergrowth to their friend's aid.